The second point, which I think is related to my comments here in a moment, is towards the family of Stephen Sotloff, who lost his life tragically in the Middle East over the last few days. We all are familiar with that horrific tale. Stephen actually lived in Miami, Florida, with his family, literally blocks away from where I go to church, literally blocks away from where I live. He was a member of our community and an American. As I said last week in his memorial service, Stephen had dedicated his life to revealing the suffering and the reality of what was happening in some of the most dangerous areas of the world. And while he lost his life tragically, I think it is ironic and appropriate that in his last act, as he lost his life, he revealed the true nature of what we confront in that part of the world and the true nature of the Islamic State and who they are and what they're all about. And this was a young man who, as I said, dedicated his life not just to journalism, but to journalism in the most dangerous part of the world, and in so doing, was able to bring that reality to us, even in the last moments of his life. Intriguing, of course, is the debate that's occurred here over the last couple of days on this very interesting political matter. A lot of hyperbole being thrown around about the influence that money has on our political process. I have found that there's plenty of money on both sides of every issue, and certainly all of my colleagues here, including those who support this amendment that's before us, have been the beneficiaries of vast amounts of campaign spending. In fact, as some of my colleagues pointed to earlier, the majority of the money that's being raised and spent in political campaigns, including from Wall Street, are on behalf of many of the same people that are now here condemning it. And so, if in fact it is so insidious, as they so say, then perhaps they should take a unilateral pledge not to accept these sorts of funds. But of course they won't. But it's an interesting dynamic at a time when our nation faces so many struggles. And what I hope and wish is that more time in this chamber were dedicated to the issues that this country is facing, the ones that threaten our status as a special and unique nation. You look across the country today at the economic challenges our people are facing. They're pervasive and they are real. You see, the 21st century has brought extraordinary and rapid change to our lives. The economy that once produced millions of jobs, that allowed people to make it to the middle class and achieve that American dream, those jobs, many of them have been outsourced or automated. They've gone away. You have millions of people out there that have worked their entire lives that now are struggling to find a job that allows them to keep pace with the cost of living. You have people stuck in low-wage jobs, and I'll have more to say about that later this week. People working for $9 or $10 an hour who cannot make ends meet, especially with these the cost of living continues to rise in every facet of our lives. You have students that have gone to school, graduated with a degree, have done everything they were told they needed to do to succeed, and now cannot find a job with the degree that they sought. But they potentially owe tens of thousands of dollars in student loans, an issue that I am both sensitive to and familiar with, because I myself owed well over $100,000, including on the day that I swore into the Senate. This is a real strain on people. Whatever it may be, there are millions of Americans that are starting to doubt whether that fundamental promise of America, that if you work hard, you can get ahead and achieve happiness as you define it, they're starting to doubt whether that's still true. And we understand the reasons why, and this is something we need to address. And you address it by addressing the core challenges of our time, which are not the different issues that I hear thrown around here today. The core challenges of our time is that, first and foremost, the nature of our economy has changed rapidly. America faces more global competition than ever for investment and for innovation. There are more countries than ever competing with us for investment and for innovation. And tragically, we haven't kept pace with that change. We still have policies in this country that are deeply rooted in the last century, in an era that has come and gone. We continue to impose taxes and regulations and a national debt and a health care law and all sorts of other measures that put us at a competitive disadvantage. So I wish that the #1 priority of the United States Senate was to make America once again the single best place in the world to invest and to innovate, so we could create millions of higher-paying jobs, millions of higher-paying 21st century jobs. I wish that was our #1 priority, followed closely by our #2 priority, which is equipping people with the skills they need for the jobs of the 21st century. You see, it wasn't that long ago where you could come to this country or grow up in this country, not have a lot of advanced education, and still make it to the middle class. My parents did it. They worked service sector jobs. My mother was a maid and a cashier at hotels. My father was a banquet bartender. They never made a lot of money, and yet they achieved the American dream. The American dream has never been about how much money you make or how many things you own. was about achieving happiness. And for them, achieving happiness was giving us the chance to do all the things they never could. And they were able to do that in the 20th century in service sector jobs. Now, that's still possible in America for many people, but it's increasingly more difficult. And I wish we would address that, because the reason why it's become more difficult is because all the higher paying jobs of the 21st century, almost all of them require some sort of advanced skill acquisition. And millions of our people simply don't have it. And the reason is because our educational system is not a 21st century one. Why have we stigmatized vocational education in America? Why have we told people that if they want to be an electrician or a plumber or a truck driver, good paying jobs, or a welder or any other number of vocational professions, why have we stigmatized that when we know that there are jobs available in those fields and we need people to fill them? The second issue is, what about the people trapped in those low paying jobs? The single mother who works as a home health aide for $10 an hour. The receptionist at a law firm making $11 an hour. The people working in a fast food restaurant for $9 an hour. There's nothing wrong with those jobs, but I'm sure that as time goes on, they want more. And we have to equip them the skills to be able to do more. So that the home health aide can become an ultrasound technician or a dental hygienist, not making $12 an hour, making $30 an hour. So that the young man who's on the unemployment line can become a welder, or can become a billing specialist, or some other 21st century career or profession that gives them the skills they need for those better paying jobs. I wish we were focused on that. And by the way, how about informing our college students about the true value of their degrees? Now, in America, free country, you can study anything you want. But before you borrow $50,000 to attain a major in Greek philosophy, you deserve to know that the market for Greek philosophers is tight, and that it's going to be difficult to pay off that loan. And I think every student in America who's taking out student loans has a right to know how much people make when they graduate from their school with that degree, so they can make informed and educated decisions about whether they should borrow money or not to pay for the specific degree that they seek. This is an important issue, and I wish that was our second top priority here, that we would focus more on how to help people trapped in low-paying jobs, how to help people that are struggling with the challenges of the 21st century, how to help these people acquire the skills they need for better-paying jobs. We've seen virtually no conversation about any of those two issues here just in the last few days. And so no wonder people are disgusted with Washington, because we don't spend any time here talking about the things that they're worried about. We spend very little time here talking about the things they're concerned about. Our discourse in this body is so irrelevant to their daily lives that they have reason not just to be disgusted with politics, but quite frankly to be tempted to give up on us and our ability to address any of these challenges. But there's a third 21st century challenge, and one that I hope to speak about here in the moments that I have left. And that is the reality that world events have an impact on us greater than ever before. Now, I'm not saying world events never used to matter. Of course they did. But we are increasingly members of a growing global economy, which means that today, when there's instability on this planet, it isn't just our national security that's threatened. It's our economic security as well. We're 6% of the world's population. In order to achieve more prosperity, we have to sell more things to more people everywhere in the world. But that depends on peace and stability across the planet. And you can't have peace and stability when the world is in chaos. And so I would say today that foreign relations and foreign policy matters more from an economic perspective than it ever has in the history of this nation. And I wish there was more focus in this body on what's happening all over the world, because the world is in total chaos. In the Asia-Pacific region, China is undergoing a dramatic modernization of their military capabilities, increasingly challenging, for example, U.S. air power in the region, and increasingly acting out on illegitimate territorial claims. In Latin America, we have seen an erosion of democratic order, the rise of anti-democratic governments that threaten to erode almost 2 decades of democratic progress in the region. By the way, in this body, we have endeavored to address one of those challenges in Venezuela, an outrage, a place full of corruption and human rights violation, an anti-American government that does everything possible to undermine us and our interests, not just the interests of their own people. And we've been blocked in our efforts to address it, because somehow the Venezuelan government, acting through Citgo, a wholly owned company of the Venezuelan government, got lobbyists to come here to the Senate and lobby for blockage and stoppage of a measure that we were ready to pass by unanimous consent. And so I come to the floor to ask the majority leader to please schedule a vote on these sanctions on Venezuela, because it will pass overwhelmingly. Do not allow lobbyists for the Venezuelan government to be able to come to Washington, D.C. and impede action on this matter. In Europe, we see chaos too. Russia has invaded Ukraine. Maybe they switched uniforms and have lied about it, but they have invaded Ukraine, and NATO has been helpless to do anything about it. And I hope that we will be more forceful in our response, because the implications, not just for that region, but for the world, are very significant. But the one I want to close on tonight focused on, and this is what relates to Stephen Sotloff a moment ago, it's what's happening with ISIL. Tomorrow night, I believe the President will give the most important address of his presidency, perhaps the most important address of any presidency in the last decade. Tomorrow night, I hope that he comes before the American people and explains to them what is truly at stake here. Now look, what I was about to say was, I thought he should have done this weeks ago, maybe months ago, but I'm glad that he's doing it. I would ask my Republican colleagues tomorrow, that at this time, all of my colleagues, that at this time of such critical national security importance, that we try as much as possible to rally behind our effort to address this challenge, because it is a real challenge. Even when this group comes after the United States, both around the world or here at home, they're not coming after Republicans and they're not coming after Democrats, they're coming after Americans. And the threat we face is real. I know we have a tradition in this government of rallying and acting in a nonpartisan way when it comes to national security. But that's not just something we do because it's polite. It's something we must do because unity is important in order to address these challenges. So I've been critical of the President. I've been critical of a slow response. And I think it is valid to point out the mistakes that he's made so we can learn from them and so he can be held accountable. But I also think it's important to look forward at what we can do now. And I thought what the President is about to do, he should have done weeks and months ago, but I'm glad he's finally doing it. Tomorrow night's address to the nation is an important one. I hope all Americans tune in. And here's the 3 points I hope the President will make. The first is I hope he clearly outlines to our fellow Americans what's at stake here. ISIL is not just a collection of crazy terrorists. It is the single most dangerous terrorist challenge this nation has ever faced. And we've faced some dangerous terrorists before. We are familiar with al-Qaeda and their capabilities. We are familiar with some of the nation states we faced down in the past. This group is uniquely dangerous for a number of reasons. First, it is by far the best funded terrorist operation, perhaps in all of human history. They are generating millions of dollars a day alone just from oil revenue. Second, they are replete with foreign fighters, including thousands of foreign fighters that have visa waiver passports from countries where all they have to do is buy a plane ticket to come to the United States. Among those, by the way, are Americans, including one who was from Florida, who even came back to the U.S. for a number of weeks and then returned and conducted a suicide attack on behalf of this group. And last but not least, they control territory. Now, we know that in order to carry out the 9/11 attacks, al-Qaeda needed a safe haven in parts of Afghanistan. Well, these folks at the Islamic State, these lunatics, they control a vast space. Most of northern Syria and vast portions of Iraq is under their control. This makes this group a very significant and dangerous group, with intentions not just on taking over Iraq, but dominating the region, ultimately moving into Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, and other places, and conducting attacks against the United States. It's simple. ISIL cannot fulfill its regional ambitions if it doesn't drive the United States out of the Middle East. And the only way they can drive us out of the Middle East is by terrorizing us out of the Middle East. And to terrorize us, they will have to conduct terrorist attacks against us, both abroad and here in the homeland. And here you have the most well-funded, most capable terrorist group in modern history, with a clear intention and desire to attack us in order to terrorize us out of the region. This is a very serious national security threat, and it is important for the President to clearly explain that to our fellow Americans. The second thing I hope he will do is outline a clear goal about what we intend to achieve, and that goal should be unequivocal: the complete defeat and annihilation of ISIL. And that goal is accomplished in 3 steps. First, by stopping their continued spread. Second, by eroding their capability and control of territory. And ultimately, by defeating them as an organization, by eliminating them as an organization. So after he's outlined who this group is and why it's in our national interest to defeat them, and he's outlined our clear goal to defeat them. I hope he will explain to the American people in as much detail as possible. Now, clearly there are some things he cannot share for operational security purposes, but in as much detail as possible, how he intends to defeat them. And I think this is a multifaceted process, but it should include the continued airstrikes in northern Iraq. By the way, airstrikes that are most successful when they're done in coordination with Kurds and Iraqi ground forces there on the ground right now. By continuing to supply and equip the Kurds, by giving them, by the way, logistical support that they need in order to take on these supplies and get them out to their troops. By hopefully working with the new Iraqi government that was just formed to stand up a unified Iraqi government that is capable of not just providing a functional government that unites all the people of Iraq, but also one that's capable of fielding security forces, capable of conducting operations without dividing the country along a Shia-Sunni line. We also need more cooperation from Arabs in the region because they're immediately threatened. They are coming after the crown in Saudi Arabia. They are coming after the crown in Jordan. They are eventually going to move into Lebanon as well. They pose a real and present threat to all the nations of this region, and they must act. We need their cooperation both militarily and diplomatically, but also by using the megaphone that their government and their state-run media provides to stigmatize this group by revealing them for who they truly are. There should be nothing romantic about ISIL in the minds of any young Arabs about joining their ranks or becoming part of their efforts. And we need these governments' help in spreading that word and in revealing that reality. By the way, we also need to work with them and other regional governments, especially the Turks, to help cut off ISIL's access to funds and to fighters. The Turks need to step up and do a better job of securing that border. By the way, cutting off their funds require us to go after perhaps their most significant source of funds, and that is their refinery capacity in Syria, and I'll have more to say about that in a moment. But we should target that because the black market sale of oil in Syria is the single and fastest growing source of revenue for ISIL, but also a fuel for their terrorist operations. But ultimately, there is no way to defeat ISIL without defeating them in Syria. Someone is going to have to confront them in Syria and defeat them. It is my hope that it will be a combination of U.S. air power and qualified, well-equipped, well-trained, competent, moderate rebel forces within Syria. Because here's the problem. If you eliminate ISIL, but you don't have some sort of capable group left behind, moderate group left behind, then all you're doing is replacing ISIL with al-Nusra or some other radical Islamic group on the ground there. And so it's important that we do both. And I know that no one wants to get in another conflict. We have no choice. We are going to have to deal with ISIL. The choice is not whether we deal with them or not. The choice is, do we deal with them now while they are still growing, or do we deal with them later when they've grown, when they now control vast and larger territory than they do now, when they have more fighters and are better funded? That's the choice before us. I would submit to you that I know of no medical condition that is easier to treat later rather than earlier. Every medical condition that I know, ISIL has been compared to cancer. Every cancer that I know is easier to treat and cure if you catch it early rather than later. I would say the same is true with this cancer, ISIL. If we deal with them sooner, it will not be costless, it will not be fast, but it will be easier to deal with than it will be if we wait till later. But to do so will ultimately require someone to confront them and defeat them within Syria itself. And defeating them in Syria alone is not enough. We have to ensure that there is some group there on the ground, some moderate rebel force that can take over, not just for them, but for the Assad regime. Because there is collusion between Assad and ISIL. Those refineries they control in Syria, those are former Assad refineries, which he won't bomb because he hopes to retake them one day intact so he can use them. There is collusion between them, if anyone has any illusions about who Assad truly is. And so I hope that the President will clearly outline this tomorrow. It is important for our nation and for the future. And I'll make one more point why I think this is the most important speech he's given in his presidency. Because this threat will probably outlive his presidency. We have to be prepared for the fact that ISIL may not be defeated in 24 months, that the next President of the United States, and many of us, whether it's serving here, whether it's controlled by Republicans or Democrats, will have to remain committed to this goal. because this threat, in all likelihood, will outlive the presidency of Barack Obama. And it is important for him to put in place a clear goal and a plan that can survive his presidency so that we can carry out this task. It is critical for our country. I wish the president the best on his address tomorrow, and I hope that we can come together in a bipartisan way to confront and defeat this evil before it is too late.